Hello there and welcome to Il Salotto Sessions. I am Sara Seravalli, an Italian event organizer with a profound enthusiasm for design and architecture, bringing over 15 years of experience from my work across showrooms in Milan, Paris and London. Fueled by a passion for connecting people in the design world, I founded Design Pop-Up in 2014, a specification-focused event that has since traveled throughout the UK and Ireland. Today I'm expanding my vision with Il Salotto, a vibrant space, both physical and virtual, dedicated to inspiring meaningful conversations and fostering connections within the design community. I hope you will enjoy my chats. Hey, good morning and welcome to this new episode of Il Salotto Sessions. I've got the pleasure of having with me here today Marc Cairns of New Practice, part of the Civic Engineer Group. Good morning, Marc.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Welcome back.
I know, a lovely sunny day to come back.
Yeah, so Marc was in the panel that they organized by the Herald Property Awards, and they came here to talk about the future of Glasgow city living. So that day we focused about housing problems and issues and potential in the city centre of Glasgow.
Correct, yeah.
Well, today I want to talk more about you and who you are and what you do and what drives you. So can you talk us through what your journey has been so far?
Sure, yeah. Well, first, thank you so much for having me today. Il Salotto, it's such a great space right in the heart of Glasgow's merchant city, a stone throw from the office. So it's just great to see
Is it have to come here?
Yeah, exactly. But to see interesting, inspiring architecture and art design spaces coming through in the city. So super important to me and something we spoke a lot about at the Herald event. But yeah, myself, so I'm a director at New Practice. We are part of Civic. And what we do at New Practice is we are an architecture practice. So we are registered, chartered, RIBA and RIAS architecture practice, which is very particularly focused around community engagement and placemaking. We have been working as a team as New Practice for about 6 years now. But my fellow co-founder, Becca Thomas, and I have been working together for about 15 years in shared practice. And that has really stemmed from a shared passion to encourage stronger and more bold conversations about how to engage people in the decisions that shape their built environment. And I guess we've done that through a real wide variety of approaches and means over those past 15 years, through various types of projects, from community engagement programs to public realm projects and public artworks, from building buildings, from retrofitting buildings, from doing master plans and strategies. What's always been at the heart of our process of working together has been using creativity, art, the tools of architecture, the tools of design to trigger important conversations about complex changes happening in the built environment. And we've been really fortunate to not only do that in my home city of Glasgow, but also work all across Scotland, across London and very much across England, increasingly now so also in Ireland, and even internationally as well, previously in our time as our working together. So yeah, just finding ways still every day that we work together to find and use creativity to bring people into those conversations about the world around them.
Do you think this is a more recent focus? Has always been an important part of the design process. I hear about talking about the importance of communities more and more. I don't know if it's one of the side effects of COVID, that we were isolated for so long, then all of a sudden we are rediscovering the importance of being together. So you've been working on this for 15 years. So what's your feeling? Is there an increased focus, or has always been there?
I like to think it has always been there. And I think in some ways, like the rest of the world around us, things come in and out of fashion. They come in and out of trend. They come in and out of being, in vogue. And that may feel like quite a kind of silly way to think about it, but I think in some way it helps it to feel less frustrating and maddening, that it isn't front and center of all the conversations we're having constantly. Because what are we doing as a community, as a profession, as an industry, if we're not all trying to make places better for people, for us, you know? So I think we were really lucky, myself and Becca, in our early partnership. We were really supported and motivated by some really important actors in that career, from Glasgow, who we met through our academic education. People like David Page from Page Park Architects, Jude Barber from Collective Architecture, who really, have a legacy of thinking about the importance of the end user. Wow, what a radical idea, right? But the importance of the end user, not only in the designs that are being produced, but in the process to create those designs. And a lot of our work, when we first started working together, Rebecca and I, was looking back to Glasgow as, really quite an amazing history of community-led activism and community-led development. Particularly in Glasgow, off the kind of 1980s labour movement around the decline of shipbuilding, and looking at the kind of renew and revival of the tenement block in the backyard. So there's been this really interesting legacy that we've kind of grew up in as practitioners and as kind of young people, where communities have always led decision making in the city. Where I think it has got more weight now in terms of the work that we do across both the public and private sector is that we are in a space now where, as a sort of society, we're recognizing that some of the decisions we've made over the past few decades that we can't support it anymore, that we can't sustain it anymore. The planet is on fire, which, it's kind of upsetting, but it's the reality. We look at what's happening across the world in many major superpowers around the move to the right, and all of these really complex things. And I think where our industry is beginning to realize is actually places and development, the way that we construct and live in the places and spaces we inhabit, actually impacts all of that. And it's been sort of commodified down to this idea of ESG, environmental social governance approaches. But it's for me, it feels like it's the private sector's way of creating a box in a spreadsheet to start to talk about it. And I think what I've seen in that box on the spreadsheet, it's got bigger and bigger over the past certainly 6 years since COVID, when we've recognized that, again, that was another moment of activism, of people saying, whoa, 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 we don't want to go back to what we were just doing there. So let's have more influence and say in how we change that. So my hope is that this trend is not just trendy, but it's a staying one. It becomes a classic, like great Italian design, So, and I think we've always been fighting for it to become that sort of fundamental way to do it, and something Becca and I had to sort of address and manage for a lot of our career was other architecture and design-led professionals sort of seeing our investment and commitment to community-led projects as being sort of novel or fluffy or cute or auxiliary to the real kind of work of being an architect or a planner or a developer. And actually for us, it's fundamental to it all. So we hope that, and I think we're really proud actually that even, in this past 15 years, we've seen a shift in thinking across the industry. We would like to think that we've contributed to that we've made talking about community, not only reminding people it's important, but almost to make it feel like it's an important and cool and even, kind of like sexy topic to talk about, right? Because you've got to find a way to get people interested and make them realize that these are complicated, but they're also fundamental, but you can also be doing really interesting, good design practice through this medium. Architects don't have to just obsess over brick choices and, which Dutch brick are we picking. They could also obsess over how do they have their designs influenced by feedback and input from local audiences.
So it's very interesting, this thing you say about community, because I obviously am an immigrant. And I lived in a couple of villages in near Glasgow Airport. But even between the two villages, the old one, there was not really community. I could barely talk to my neighbors. The one I'm just now is so strong. And you can feel it in Glasgow as well. The A&D community in Glasgow is so strong. And when we had here, I had here Janice Kilpatrick from Graven a couple of weeks ago for lunch, and she was saying, we are a community. We help each other. There is so many practices that work together. You mentioned Jude, you mentioned David Page, but then Graven worked with 360, and it's such a lovely way to exchange knowledge and inspire one another. And actually, we are all working for the same goal, isn't it? We are just working to make good architecture.
Yeah, I think I come from Glasgow. My paternal family is from Springburn in the north. My maternal family is from Ricasey in the East End. So, I'm definitely a boy of the city. And I think actually what I kind of witnessed growing up and what I was really lucky and privileged to see in those, very working class and quite challenging communities to grow up in was this real pride of shared labor and this real pride of, I guess, kind of design thinking and problem solving and collaboration as a community without realizing that's what you were doing. It was just what you did to live and exist in a neighborhood. And I always remember my granny Rose lived for the kind of final decades of her life in the Balgrey Hill Flats up in Springburn, and I spent a lot of my time there as a young guy because my mum was a nurse working night shifts, and it was this really tall building. It was 24 stories. Which is crazy in Glasgow that we just have these buildings on the edge of the city. And she was on the 18th floor, 4 apartments. And I used to love every week going into the building and seeing whose turn it was to clean the landing, to clean the hall. And there was this fabulous, key for the cleaner's cupboard, this big wooden block on it that would get posted through the letterbox in a clockwise circle every week. And then that week it was your job to clean the landing, take all the rubbish out. There's a real kind of civic pride in your space and doing that in collaboration with your neighbours. I think we have lost some of that. I think as a city, we have to make more efforts. I think as we become more online and we become more work from home and we're all sitting on teams, we maybe our worlds become smaller. Which in a city like Glasgow, I think is something we have to be really aware of avoiding because whilst we're a third biggest city in the UK or something, and we have we're a biggest city in Scotland. That there's a lot going on here. We're still probably punching above our weight as a city and as a design community. I think certainly so. And I think with that kind of growing up in Glasgow and that experience I had has always kind of led me into a space in my professional career where it's always been about collaboration over competition. We can just sort of pass the key to each other and say, actually, you're better at doing this now, or it's your turn. Like we did it last week. Why don't you do it now?
Yeah.
And it means that actually everyone's sharing and learning and growing adjacent to one another. And again, like if we're here and we're practicing in the city, not always, whether it's onto the city or from the city or out of the city, we should be wanting to make this place a better place for everyone. So I think we've always had that personal and professional genesis of our practice, and we like to kind of try and support and encourage that now too. And it's been great even seeing every year, you have students of architecture from Dundee or Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, wherever, Manchester, London, who are doing their thesis work. And, you get emails saying, we want to interview about for our dissertations or our thesis or our projects on community-led development. And I just think that shows there is a change in how young people are thinking about the industry they're moving into. And hopefully that change is being motivated by a strong collaborative network in the city of people trying to really work together and use the strengths that individual practitioners and practices have to make a better collective outcome.
Right, let's go back to your work now. How can placemaking support the community engagement?
Yeah. I mean, I think like there's lots of different ways that the work that we do is we feel important.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally there is a responsibility for the people we work with, whether that's local authority or a third sector organization or a private developer, planner, another architect. There's a responsibility of those, businesses, not charities, they're businesses. Even local authorities, they have a duty bearing responsibility. As someone who gains money from council tax or taxes from their citizens, there's a duty for them to act responsibly. Our role as a practice through the work we do across community engagement and placemaking is to ensure the public have broadest access as possible to understand, first and foremost, the projects that are happening around them, understand why, and understand how they can be part of that journey, but also make suggestions or present their motivations as to why they think something could be challenged or strengthened. What's important to them, and I think where we have to be really careful is that isn't, and where we do not do work in this way, that is not a exercise that is statutory, and it has to happen just because it has to happen. It should be at the foundation of thinking. So good design and good design outcomes for us as a practice are only able to happen when diverse voices are involved in the process of creating that design. That has to be in terms of the design teams that are bringing it together, but also the communities you're talking to. And so there's a lot of different expertise and tools and approaches we provide as a practice. I would say our work is often, because we are architecturally trained, we understand how difficult it is to get planning permission, how difficult it is to, be working on a, £23 million landscape public park on a river and all the complex engineering, road traffic. How do you make that work to budget, inflation, how difficult it is to make these projects. And we understand the inputs that design teams need from the public. And a big part of our job is really to come in and be the tool to translate what is really complex information into themes, ideas, and routes for the public to have real influence. This is not about saying, we're doing this, do you like it? And if you like it, can you put a big green tick? We're actually not there ever, and we should never be there as designers to build consensus in a transactional way. We're there to build consensus through knowledge exchange, through sharing of ideas, through listening. And that's really what's fundamental to our practice. And we really pride ourselves on being very particular and selective about who we work with. We need to work with other architects, other designers, other developers, other local authorities who have the same shared values and believe in that same shared responsibility. They do not want to hire us to simply go and ask questions to people and
they need to be as committed as you are.
Absolutely, because they want that genuine change to come from the communities they're working in. So where also we see our role is also understanding that there's the excitement for us in sometimes not always getting the answer you expect.
Yep.
And that's probably where our most interesting projects tend to arrive, is when you uncover something that is completely absent in the thinking of a project or hasn't been at the front and center of how briefs evolved. It's when you really talk to people, and by talking to people I mean not just the usual suspects. When you talk to people on the fringes of community, you talk to young people, you talk to people from different lived experiences, queer people, you talk to people from disabled persons groups. When you have these really open, broad conversations, that's when design really comes to life. Because we can only hold so many lived experiences in our brain, and we only really can feel so emotionally connected to our own lived experience. So we have to, as designers and as new practice, we are out there trying to listen to as many abstract and different lived experiences from our own, so that when we bring that into our design teams and through the people we're talking to, we're really changing the way that design lands in the city, and it feels Glaswegian, or it feels like it's London, or it feels like it's Manchester, or it feels like it's Dublin, not because of a color palette, not because of material choice,
because of the community.
because of the community, and because of the conversations that have taken place. And we all know when, like, you can see uh, decoration being used to justify intent, and we don't want to do that. We want the design to be so clearly of its place because it's responding to the fundamental needs.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Right, let's talk about something that we both are passionate about, arts.
Yes.
Right. I found this quote. It was an interview to Peter Millikan, the chairman of Parabola. And he says here, culture is a major plank in building relationships with the local community around us. We have engaged with local schools in poetry workshops and drawing sessions, and we are supporting Big Noise as they make their new home as our neighbor in West Edinburgh. So they were talking about one of the developments in Edinburgh. You also use a lot of art in your projects.
Yeah. I mean, I think what was interesting is when Becca and I first started working together, I think we didn't really realize we were operating in what would be traditionally termed as a visual arts, public arts space.
Yeah.
We were using the practice of bringing people together through shared experience to have conversations about communities. And we sort of developed an arts practice through creating mechanisms that actually were fundamentally about recreating familiar domestic environments in public space as a way to create a level playing field between lots of different people and create open, honest conversations. So we first built together in Ridgely in a community garden as part of a harvest festival in 2011 that was run by a then public arts agency in Scotland called MVA, by Angus Farquhar. We built an outdoor, barbecue area with kind of canopies and built-in planting in like 2011. And we were kind of just doing it to do it. It was quite kind of, we went to the community, we made jam with them one day as a way of kind of having a conversation about what was working with their community garden, what wasn't. We arrived at this design for this kind of patio barbecue planted area. We built it with our own bare hands at that time because, we were young and naive. And actually what we realized from doing that was that our practice was making spaces, and that's evolved over the past 15 years into various types of more, I guess, formal commission. But I think for us, where we see that public arts practice and that ability to use visual arts and public arts practice, a way of bringing together people, being important, is because architecture is very slow. Building anything is very slow.
Yeah.
The delivery of master plans we work on now are, 5, 10, 15, 20-year visions.
Yeah.
And
probably change
and
the
they probably
process.
change because the world changes.
Budgets and cost
and the world changes so much, So I think where we have really found joy in public arts practice is the ability to really focus on the now. What are your needs for now? And how can we address that? And they always have had these domestic or familiar convivial experiences that underpin them. A very different example, but also very similar, was a project we delivered in Lahore in Pakistan in 2016 for the first iteration of the Lahore Biennale, where we were invited to deliver this project with two artists in Pakistan, Anam Barbar and Matt Kushan, through the British Council. And we basically created a very different budget and a very different material palette. We were using paving stones in Ridgely in 2011, and in Pakistan we were using marble and onyx, and working in a public park. We basically created seating, planting, and a stage. We created this kind of ground marble and onyx sculpture that basically created a place for people to come together, dance, perform on, meet. Like in all of our public arts practice, we not only create a space, our practice is about how you animate it. So it's not enough to create, and this is the same how we approach place and architecture. It's not enough to do the design. The design is how you activate it and how you support the community.
So do you go back to make sure they're using what you design in the right way or at the full potential?
Yeah, I think we always try to have moments where we celebrate the arrival of something, and that's where we often use our skills. Like in the project in Ridgeway, we launched it with a community barbecue. We in Pakistan, we launched it with an evening of performances. Even work we delivered in King Park in Glasgow to refurbish and retrofit an old Edwardian school. That was a 4.5 year process of like labor and love to bring this building back into use. But we put on a lunch, we put on a kind of community day as new practice, putting our money and resource into that to demonstrate, not that the people running the building needed to see that, but almost to kind of test the success of our own design. And that's quite fundamental to how we orchestrate the work we deliver in public realm. But I think it's important that type of approach is perhaps where Scotland, and in particular Glasgow and Edinburgh, are quite far behind the other major cities in the UK when it comes to thinking about temporary activation of sites, when it comes to thinking about meanwhile use of sites, when it comes to thinking about how specific, creative, bold, colourful, creative interventions into underutilized public spaces or public realm could help to better communicate the ambitions, the long-term ambitions for those sites. It's something we don't do very well in
No, I think there is a lack of ambition building for the build environment in Scotland. There's definitely a lot. There's so many things we could do better.
And I think the challenge there is, and I think this is where the type of public arts or public art practice we have could and would be very useful, is there is a lot of really intelligent and intense strategic thinking happening in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Aberdeen and Dundee, but a lot of it is not very well communicated often, and a lot of it is so long term that people don't see the benefits of it right away.
Yeah.
And actually, where I've seen and really learned a lot from when we've delivered projects in London, or we've been fortunate to be working alongside colleagues in London, is there's a big vision that's going to happen in 10 years. But for the next 2, we're going to take this space and we're going to do something with it so that you see as a community we're invested, we're here, we have opportunities and routes to communicate to you our plans.
Yeah.
And we don't do that as well here. So I think where we see the evolution of our public arts practice, it's actually moving away from seeing it as because a lot of people still, I think, unfortunately, especially within the development world and the kind of regeneration community and the architecture community, see public art as auxiliary or extra, or a cherry on top.
I can see how that happens.
When actually we want to see it as it's meanwhile and it's worthwhile and it's about opening up conversations about transition and change. So if we can begin to take the practice that we've built over the past 15 years in that public arts and public realm space and move that into more of a conversation around meanwhile and worthwhile uses for site, I think Glasgow would feel very different as a city. I think a lot of places in Scotland would feel different. And it's a way, I think, to start to bridge conversations that I think happen successfully in other cities. Perhaps, again, they're just more visible around partnership between the public and private sector. So we don't really know what we're doing here yet, but we get this is a big space right in the heart of your city. Probably shouldn't just have it hoarded off. So can we come to some agreement and find a way to demonstrate all of the shared values we have as public and private interest to say, this is what we're going to do here. We're not quite there yet, but can we just start testing the parameters of it? And then what happens there that it really excites me is failure is kind of embraced. So if you put something into a site and it doesn't work, well, thank God we didn't just build a whole £20 million scheme around it. Right?
You can learn. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's a really good word, actually. I think for us, public arts practice is a tool for learning. It's learning what people respond to positively, what works, what doesn't work. And that kind of temporary sort of high impact but low risk nature of it is really appealing to me personally as a practitioner, as a designer.
So this is May now. So middle of June here in Salotto, we're going to have a sustainability week. So it's 3 days where we just talk about sustainability. And we have panel discussions about retrofitting. And we have presentation with Graven about circular economy, and Best is involved. So that's something else that is a very much at the core of new practice. Use and retrofit. Where's this passion coming from?
Yeah, so I think for new practice, and for myself and Becca, and our shared practice, we were doing retrofit and reuse before it was called retrofit.
Yeah, trendsetters.
Yeah, and I think again, it probably wasn't because it was a decision motivated to be part of a particular community or part of a particular trend forecast. It was where we found the most interesting opportunities to work as practitioners. We knew when we began working together, we didn't want to do domestic residential housing extensions. We knew we didn't want to do a particular type of architectural product that didn't really align with the values and the spaces that we were still curious about experimenting and playing with in our kind of architectural world. And from that kind of took us into weird, obscure buildings and places that were kind of abandoned, but they had some glimmer of personality still, and we had a group or an organization we knew that had a need, and we almost became brokers. We did this with a building in the Barras, now ran really successfully for the past 8 years by Many Studios, which is a community interest company which provides creative workspace, event space. We found a landlord at a building that was lying derelict. We found a community that had a need, so we put them together. And we, at the time, did an adapt to reuse scheme for this, market hall building in the Barras. I guess we would now call it a retrofit scheme, and I think our passion really stemmed from that project, but it goes deeper than just thinking about retrofit and reuse when we talk about it on a scale of a building.
Yeah.
We're always trying to think about how we avoid build and burn. So as a practice, right down to when we're working on community engagement projects, how can we reuse materials? How can we think really carefully about material choices, that we're printing choices? How can we think really carefully about when we're designing exhibitions, how can we reuse, one structure from client A and have a conversation about using it for client B? Just trying to avoid the use of virgin material as much as possible. When we do use that kind of virgin material, it's for something that's really special or deserves that kind of moment to bring in that sort of need or want for something new. So I think it's just always been there in our thinking, but probably being very honest as well. That's maybe initially being motivated by a commercial perspective, by an access perspective. It's just been the tool that we've been playing with, but now it is very fundamental to how we think about our sustainability as a practice. We're probably also quite cautious to even suggest that our practice is inherently sustainable, because we're part of the construction industry, which is actually just not sustainable. So we are, whether we want to accept it or not, we are contributing to an industry that is bereft of sustainability. It's just not sustainable, and there is not enough being done to make it sustainable. That is a huge reason why Becca and I joined Civic and became part of that team, because we've always really looked to civic engineers, which is also part of the parent company Civic. We've always looked to civic engineers as being really smart, intelligent, design-led engineers who are working on projects where they're really fighting for climatically resilient solutions, really having conversations about the responsibility of engineers to think more sustainably, to encourage more sustainable thinking, but also accepting they're also part of a bigger system of thinking that needs to change. And I think that's really important. We've never wanted to be a practice that participated in greenwashing. We actually held an event last year in our office as part of the Architecture Fringe Festival last year that actually looked at greenwashing. It actually looked at what is the pervasiveness of greenwashing in our industry. Are we having an honest enough conversation about where we're not doing well enough? So I think the fact the conversation is there and it's ongoing, it's good. But again, maybe looking back to the very first question you asked, like, we need to make sure it's not a trend, that it's fundamental.
It's a major change.
It's a major change, that it becomes another constituent, classic, fundamental part of the conversation. And the conversation for our clients and as to who and why they are selecting to work with certain businesses. There needs to be more of a trigger within the way work is procured within the architecture and design industry that puts stronger merit on businesses' credentials around sustainability, around social value, as opposed to cost. Because that's short-term thinking, and I think as an industry we need to have more cathedral thinking.
Yeah, it's funny how you say that. I've been thinking more and more about development in Scotland, right? When you were here at the panel discussion, we mentioned Capital and Century, they're based in Manchester.
Yeah.
And what I love about them is that they obviously is a developer, so it's a private company, so they need to make money. But then at the same time, they're so careful about the social impact of their developments and the regeneration. It's not just about there is a lot of excellent social housing done in Scotland, but there's the council.
Yeah.
So how can we get the decision makers to actually support more of these developers that most of the development in Scotland I've seen, and I'm fully aware probably there's few I don't know anything about, but if we are lucky, they take care of the sustainability side of things. But very rarely they look at, does this project look nice in the street? Or does this project support the community? Does this project create a community? So what can we do to actually push private developers, encouraged to be more ambitious with what they're doing?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And again, I think where our practice has had real opportunity to understand alternative ways to approach this is because we have been lucky to work in London on projects we're working in Blackpool right now with a really incredible Anglo-Dutch practice called McQueen Lavington on a new design code for Blackpool, right? So these kind of projects that are working outside of the kind of metrics and policies and thinking that kind of Glaswegian way of doing things in this city. And I think where I don't have all the answers to those questions, I think they're probably very complex and interlaced, and again, probably back to procurement, back to support and rents and inflation and all different metrics, land values, all etc. Where I think we don't place enough focus on is, and this is how people experience the city, this is how people experience developments, is that ground floor, is that connection to the city, is that activation. I mean, it's really funny actually. I was having a conversation with my barber last month who is looking to move his shop unit from a current property he's renting with a ubiquitous property landlord in the city that will go unnamed, but I think we can all know who they are. They're not being very kind to their customers at the moment. So he's looking to move and go somewhere that it's not one of their assets. And he's been shopping around for these ground floor units, of which there is an abundance. But even he, as an end user, as a customer, as a consumer, as someone who wants to rent space, he was messaging me going, what is going on with the design of these ground floor units? Every shop unit I go to see has massive X bracing in the window, or in the main selling point of the space. Who designed these? These are terrible.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not paying £40,000 a year to share my shop front with a massive knots and crosses board. And it was a really kind of like interesting moment for me, because I'm like, yeah, who is designing this? Who is not thinking about, you're sort of prioritizing the structural design, I guess.
Yeah, taking away window shopping from us. Come on, bring it back.
But then what's happening? Since having this conversation with my barber Daryl, I've started plotting them psychologically in my mind as I walk through the city. But what's happening is that means there's just lots of units with signs saying to rent.
Stay empty.
And then that just means that there's a feeling that there's no life here. So I think there is so many small changes we could make to the conversation around projects that are not about developers sacrificing profit from 25% to 20%. We're not even asking you to do that. It's maybe just saying, why are these spaces empty?
And you pay more attention to small details that actually make a huge difference.
I don't think it's because you need to redo your marketing brochure or you need to get a new agent.
Take the bloody cross off the front window.
You know what I mean? I think we're probably not having the right conversations about, well, we're putting this new block of accommodation that's required to fit all of these needs that the council and local and national government have set for, repopulating the city, for bringing a better nighttime economy in. But have we really thought about how this building works on a 1 to 10,000 scale, a 1 to 1,000 scale, a 1 to 100 scale, a 1 to 1 scale? How is that threshold? That's a really simple design conversation that so many people in the city would be so excited to have that nitty-gritty detail, so that then my barber could say, I want to, move out of this unit and go find a new one, and be like, which one will I choose? Not, is there any I can go into? So yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons I think we could learn where we can make simple changes and tune-ups that we were talking about, that ground floor, the way that these blocks of accommodation, commercial, residential use land into the city. And I think a lot of those lessons we've seen on projects we've worked in London and elsewhere, where that design code does extend to the door handle. What is that feeling you have crossing over that threshold? We're not at that level of detail yet here. We don't have a system in place which is requiring designers to evidence they have thought at that granular level. And that's a bit of a shame, that's something where, as a A&D community, we're giving up on.
Then note, if you're a developer in Scotland and you are about to build a new building, make sure you get Marc involved.
Yes.
So you can talk about all the end users of the different spaces you're creating and make sure they work for them.
Yeah, exactly. No knots and crosses boards.
No, let us have some window show.
Yes. Exactly.
Marc, thank you very much. That was really interesting.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much for listening to Il Salotto Sessions. If you enjoyed the chat, please make sure you share with your friends and follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcast. For more information on our events, please visit ilsalotto.design and designpopup.com. You can also find us on Instagram _designpopup and Il Salotto Glasgow, as well as LinkedIn. Should you have any feedback, questions or suggestions, please do get in touch at hello@ilsalotto.design. We would love to hear from you. Thank you.